Well, welcome everyone who signed in. I hope you're ready for a magnificent hour to dig into cognac and cheese. My name is Alan Katz. If we've not met before, I'm the owner and founder of New York Distilling Company. I'm coming to you from Williamsburg in Brooklyn, where I make gin and rye whiskey. And I do hope we've had the chance to interact in the past. I'd even suggest if you want to take a moment, you could even put in the chat, which I'll give you some instructions on in a moment, who you are, where you work, where you're from. It would be great to see names that we're familiar with, and maybe you'll find someone that you haven't seen in a while, and a great way just to share this experience as we are virtual today together. And most wonderfully, I'm joined by Tia Keenan, and I always say when I talk about Tina, just Google her. But this is one of our great cheese enthusiasts, auteurs, and experts. Tia's in Queens, and you can find her writing on cheese all over the internet, in print and online. But she also has some fantastic books on cheese: The Art of the Cheese Plate, Pairings, Recipes, Style, Attitude, Short Stack Chèvre, and a fun book that I went through with my kids called Melt, Stretch, and Sizzle, The Art of Cooking Cheese. And it's really our pleasure to enjoy this experience with you today. Thank you for those who are putting in a little bit of your details in the chat room. A few instructions just as we get started, a few things to keep in mind. So we're going to present to you, discuss with you for about an hour. I hope all of you, but certainly most of you have samples that were sent out of delicious cognacs and magnificent cheeses that we'll walk you through together. We'd love for you to post something today on social media and mention either at Cognac USA or hashtag Cognac USA. There's also hashtag Cognac Connection. And you'll see these on the slides, but it would be great. I know we all get a little brain trust and brain tired at the same time these days, but it really is meaningful for all the tremendous effort that it takes to go through and put these programs together, that if you could take a moment and post something on social media. Hey, Tim Miner, good to see you there. But what we're doing today is a brief cognac overview, a primer, if you will, just to make sure we all have the same baseline and maybe something interesting or two that we haven't thought about for a while as professionals in the industry. And we're going to go through a really terrific tasting of 5 cognacs and 4 cheeses that Tia has selected. And hopefully you have these at the ready. If you have questions along the way or comments, put them in the chat. And I've got the chat open here. We have people observing the chat room, and we'll get to as many questions as possible before we round things out just around the top of the hour at 2 p.m. So again, just a remembrance for those who are joining now. We'll go through our wonderful and fun presentation. Hopefully, again, a primer that's thought-provoking and taste-provoking. But if you could take the time today, either at Cognac USA or hashtag Cognac USA or hashtag Cognac Connection on your own social media feeds, and we'll follow back along. So thank you for joining us today. And here we are, ready to dig in.
I'm so excited, Alan.
Hey, Tia.
I am, because first of all, I love doing this with you, and I've been working with Cognac USA for a while, but my favorite kind of panel is the panel where someone else does most of the work, and then I roll in with amazing cheeses, and we all just get to talk about how delicious everything is.
Well, I love it. It's my
what
pleasure.
A dream job.
Well, it's a dream for me too, because I love these cheeses. I was saying to Tia, I'm a fanatic already about some of these cheeses and the cognacs too. So we won't refresh. You see our pretty pictures there. Ha ha ha. But it's a pleasure to join you. And we'll go on to the next slide and get ourselves started. So we know, of course, cognac is from France. And I believe we have a beautiful video to get us started. Okay, terrific. In my mind, I wrote that theme music. I didn't, to be honest, but it's like that in the Olympic theme. But thank you again. So again, a quick primer on cognac. Some of this is information that really comes out of the BNIC, vital information that we want to share and make sure we're in the know from a consistency standpoint. Some of it may be familiar to you already, and a few things that I always like to chime in from my own perspective, primarily as a distiller of whiskey. That was another product that's aged. So we'll go through these slides. And again, if you have questions along the way, just put them in the chat. These are, again, you can read them as well as I. Some of the interesting things, whenever I see something like this and I see fourth biggest French vineyard by area, I'm always curious. What's the first? I believe it's Languedoc. I am not an expert on all French wine, but I believe that's the case. If someone has another answer, they can chime in on the chat. But when I see these, I immediately go to the research, whether by book or Google or otherwise, and say, well, what are those above it? How does it relate to other things that we might be familiar or interested in? We'll go on to the next slide, please. So to me, this is the most interesting. And most of us have seen, particularly on the right side, a map of cognac. And I know that at this scale, it might be a little bit hard to read some of the cities and the towns on the map. But if you haven't in a while, this is something, I'm not saying keep it in your wallet, but that it's great to go online or from one of your books that you may have at home, from a research standpoint, just to revisit what are the regions. And some of the things that we'll really focus on when we get to the tasting is how the regions and their proximity, whether to the mountains or to the Atlantic Ocean, affect these cognacs, and two, what type of soil the grapes themselves are growing in. And these are some of the things that we'll really talk about in terms of this delineated production area that I know we've all seen before, and sort of in concentric circles, how the regions of cognac have worked and in history, how they've developed. And you can see there, and you can Google it to translate hectares to acres if you so choose, that how much land we're really covering, a significant part here on the sort of southwestern coast of France. And one of my favorite aspects, sort of the winemaking and distilling aspects of production. We'll continue to the next slide. So again, just a little bit from the introductory standpoint to give you some sense of size. And these things change. This is not static. We're in living, breathing mode here. Thank you, Emily. Phew. Languedoc is correct. Appreciate it. This is not a small number of people. This is an integrated system, whether you're farm to bottle or you act as a negociant, growing grapes or selling grapes. This is a really intricate system that has been developed over generations. And you can imagine, particularly in a place like France and other parts of Europe that take on these types of operations, how relationships come into play. Next slide, please. So here we go. This eau de vie made from wine. The next slide, please. So one of my favorite things, those of you that I may have had the pleasure of interacting, those in New York in particular, when we talk about cognac in person, whether on its own or cocktails, is as a distiller from the heart of what I do professionally, I'm always amazed at this contraption, the Charente still, this distillation process, which is nearly unique on the planet. It is important to note, as it says, 9 liters of wine yield 1 liter of cognac. And you can see there that the ABV is much higher than it would be at bottling. That's a maximum by requirement. And I'll give you one reference point as a rye whiskey distiller. The rules and regulations on distilling rye whiskey are about 2 narrow paragraphs. I call them paragraphs because that's how they show up in the TTB manual. The book on the rules and regs on producing cognac from start to finish is biblical. And this really comes into play. And sometimes as Americans, we say, oh, these rules, they're so onerous. Why would anybody go through the hoops and the hurdles to make this product the way it's set out and required to do so. And it really starts for me in the most interesting fashion once the grapes get to distillation. But we'll talk about that in detail. The next slide, please. So I mentioned one of the things that's of greatest interest to me that we'll talk about, I think in part in relation to the geography of the cognacs that we'll taste together, is the soil. And you can read this slide on your own. What I'll reference, because it's as interesting whether you grow grapes in North America, whether you grow grapes on the southwest coast of France, or whether you grow grains in either of these regions or somewhere else in the world. These types of characteristics surely are familiar to us all. Clay. When it says flint, we're really talking a lot about limestone and sand. We know what these materials are. For those of us that have visited wine regions, we hear these things a lot. And just to give some reference points of why they're so instrumental, clay, in very basic terms, retains moisture. We're growing something that's living and breathing. The vineyards have cycles annually, year after year after year. And so we want to remember clay retains soil. When we talk about clay and flint as a combination, we're talking again about limestone and other stones, and what those in part are nutrients. These stones have their own natural apparatus of nutrients that are passed on to the grapes that are growing. From my experience a long time ago, growing grapes and making wine in Europe, that my characteristic is that limestone and flint, from a nutrient base, tends to produce somewhat sweeter grapes. And then sand, we all know sand from the beach, it doesn't drain quite as well, say, as clay and limestone or clay on its own, but it's ideal for wetter climates. And so when we get to regions closer down to the coast, this becomes instrumental. Next slide, please. So we'll go through this quickly, but this is an image of the Charente still. And if you notice where it says wine preheater, this is the point I always love to point out. Other than that, this is a pot still, like the same still that has been around for centuries, developed likely in China, brought through Europe, whether France or all the way to Ireland, by monks who learned these skills and brought them across continents over centuries. So you understand how this works, where the pot itself is heated, we're turning an alcoholic liquid base into vapor to refine the alcohol. We know that fermentation is the creation of alcohol, distillation is the refinement. But we also know, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that the cognac season is regulated, specifically the months that we're allowed to distill from the beginning of October to the end of March. It is a 5-month sprint, and that's it. And so anything to enhance the efficiency of distilling cognac to me is quite remarkable. So when the first batch is in and being distilled, in the wine preheater, we introduce our second batch to be distilled. And so that it's warmed to a degree, not overheated, but warmed to a degree that when it goes into the pot still after the first run is finished, that it's that much closer to the point of distillation. And in distillation, we're really talking in the range of 78 to 80 degrees Celsius, where the liquid starts to turn to vapor. I can tell you, we're all in winter. I see someone from Minneapolis, Brooklyn, other places. Unless you're in Southern California, you're probably in a climate that's at least chilly. You know, we're in the 40s today, and we'd consider it mild for February in New York. Hey, Riza, wow, you're in San Fran? My God, this is too funny. You don't know where people are anymore. It's pretty chilly. Imagine, you know, in November, December, January, and you're at the freezing point outdoors, and you need every moment of time for your distillation runs. That wine preheater is so ingenious because it adds to the volume that can be distilled in a given session. We'll go on to the next slide, please. We'll also talk here a bit about aging and blending, of course, and the vitality of it, and what the challenge is. Blending is such an overlooked skill set, one that I rarely used before, but it's something so instrumental. You say, oh, they're the master distiller, a vital, important cog in the production of any aged spirit. But the attention to aging and when it is ready, not just by regulation, but also obviously by taste and aromatic sensibility. But blending is a skill set and a focus all on its own without interference. And that job is vital. And we'll talk about that as we taste the whiskeys together. Next slide, please. So the wood is vital. Drying and maturation on this slide, the most interesting thing to me is it's dried and seasoned for 2 to 3 years. To me, this is most instrumental. One, we're talking about European and Slovenian varieties of oak that tend to be, if you're familiar like I am with American whiskey, far more dense than the oaks that we grow in the United States. They look similar as trees and the leaves that are coming off the trees, but the oaks themselves as varieties of wood is much denser. So it'll come into factual importance as we talk about the finishing of cognac. But keep in mind that once upon a time, the drying and seasoning of this wood probably wasn't 2 to 3 years, same as it wasn't in the United States. It probably was a younger, greener wood, but this is what's come down to pass as instrumental for imparting cognacs that we've all become familiar with. Next slide, please. So the wood is going to impart some of these characteristics. You can read as well, both their proper names and their functional names in English: vanilla, clove and cinnamon, etc., and coconut. Next slide, please. Again, toasting. You're probably familiar with this, that barrels for cognac are toasted, not charred. I'll leave it at that. You can read the rest of the slide. But toasting is just like your old-fashioned toaster at home. When you put the sliced bread in, push it down, and the flame never actually really integrates with the wood. Where in American oak tradition, for whiskey and others, we're taking a flamethrower to that wood to specifically char it. These terms are not interchangeable, and they have very interesting and purposeful effects on the wood itself. Next slide, please. So you'll notice this. Again, you'll get the slide, but these are things, to be very honest, we've probably gone over before. You've seen them in presentations, but sometimes we tend to let the details slip. It's important, perhaps when you get this, or maybe you're sharing it with colleagues as well, of when the distillation point is and at what degree by years we get to the most familiar categories of VS and VSOP, XO, and now XXO relatively recently, of course, but keep these in mind, as it says, from the starting point, from distillation to when they're released, how they're categorized. Next slide, please. So some of these, this is just a beautiful picture, and it's something I'd almost say, scan this quickly and take a quick snapshot. Close your eyes, see how many you can remember, because this is not, although science is applied, absolute. This is based on our own palates as we get into our tasting. Do we taste strawberry? Do we taste pineapple, tangerine, honey? Take a quick snapshot of this and we'll refer to it, and you can say, yes, I taste those things, or perhaps maybe we don't. And obviously it says there are 40 some olfactive, this is the olfactory, our nasal sentences, our aromatic contributions. So do we both smell and taste some of these attributes as we go along? Hopefully you got that snapshot. Next slide, please. So we'll get into our pairings. Take a deep breath. If you need to cleanse your palate, by all means, take this moment to do so. Again, I hope that you have received the cheese and cognac in the mail. Again, thanks, great thanks to our colleagues for making the great effort to put this together. And some things will be surprises. Some things will be interesting. I will suggest taste the cognac on its own, and then we'll go to Tia for her expert opinion on how she selected or why she selected a particular cheese with a particular cognac. And what I would consider is, we'll get Monique, we'll just get to the first in just a moment, and we'll give you time to taste. The first is the Miocal and the Gabrielson, if you want to prepare from the cognac standpoint. But consider, for all of us that have worked with cognac, whether recently or for years, the primary attributes, not just from that last slide, of all of those beautiful sensory elements that we might associate with different cognacs. But keep in mind, and as we talk about the cognacs, where they're from. Cognacs today are primarily produced from one grape, Uni Blanc. And when you travel to Cognac, they say, oh, this grape is a little bit of an exaggeration. It's no good for wine. So we'll distill it and make cognac. We'll make brandy with it. A wonderful attribute. For me, having lived and worked in Italy for 2.5 years, I loved Trebbiano, the Italian cousin to Uni Blanc, as an almost everyday lunchtime wine. I thought it had great fruit. It's not the most structured wine, but it has great attributes as well. But what we're looking at to translate this from grape to wine to cognac, from my perspective, is the acidic backbone. And whether we're pairing this with chocolate or bread, in today's case, cheese, it's how that acidity, and ultimately the acidity that leads to some of the other flavor attributes, ultimately play into the hands of these pairings. So, without further ado, let us pray. I'm kidding. Let us begin. Here we go. Cognac, Miocal. Take a minute. You can organize these. The first two here, I'm not going to read from this slide, but what I would suggest is really take a moment. I'm pouring again along with you. I did taste these this morning, but we'll take the nose. If you want, I'm taking a little quick taste, and then my favorite way to smell, particularly for distilled spirits, is short, quick sniffs. And then put the glass away and say, what do I recollect? It really trains your brain to work harder, to focus on that. Quick sniffs and put it away. And if you don't get that attribute today, it's something I'd certainly encourage you putting into practice with any of the distilled spirits you might be taking on from a professional standpoint for evaluation. So the key to me here is the appellation, the cru where these grapes are coming from are Grand Champagne, Petit Champagne, Borderie, Fimbois, and Bombois. So we'll use this as a baseline, but notice the fruit range and the acidic balance here as we start in this VS variety. Tia, how did you select these first cheeses? This first cheese?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people want to, when they're pairing cheese and beverages, they want to go straight to the sort of flavor components or notes. So, oh, this wine or this cognac has lychee, so I want to find a cheese that matches that. But I want everyone in this room today to think about weight. We don't think about the weight of cheese, the density of cheese. And I think when we're pairing with cognac, you need something with some weight on it. I don't want to eat cognac and a sort of lighter cheese like a ricotta. I want something that's got some really dense butter fat so that the cognac can really kind of like push against that. And as it pushes, I think you really can sort of bloom the notes of the cognac that way. It's almost like a mirror or something like that. So I chose Cognac. These are all Northeastern cheeses. I thought it's a good idea to stay with a with regionality in mind, since Cognac is regional agricultural product. And this is a mixed milk cheese. It's cow's milk and goat's milk and cow's milk cream. So there again, you have that weight, which I think distilled spirits, especially complex ones like Cognac, really need cheese with weight. And so just really creamy. We're doing this cheese with the 2 Cognacs.
Right.
This is the one pairing that's doubling up. And it's a reciprocal pairing, right? Because you're eating the cheese and then you want to have the Cognac, and then you have the Cognac and it makes you want to eat more cheese. Like, to me, that is always the most successful pairing, is like they need each other. And also, just in terms of practicality, I don't know who's writing menus and doing pairings in their own bars, but this is like a universally loved style of cheese. So relatively mild, very creamy, lots of butter fat right up front. And I think it's a good way to start to introduce Cognac with cheese. I think a lot of people go straight to wine. They don't necessarily think about distilled spirits, but Cognac is actually like the perfect entry for that, like rarefied sort of
I
church-like
if I may,
experience that we can
I'll
have.
just add, one of the things that I think is lovely, and as you described it, sort of in this creme fraiche quality,
Mhm.
is that hopefully, obviously, both of these cognacs, the Mucau and the Gabrielson, they're both VS, so minimum 2 years in
Mhm.
a barrel, and that's the wood quality. And the
Mm.
wood is gentle on both of these, so not a ton of time, all things being
Yeah.
equal, in the barrel. But remember, going back to that toasting effort, that it's not charred, it's just gentle toasting. And what it brings out is, I would say, almost a categorical elevation or step up of a dancing fruit quality. And again, if you took a snapshot of that slide with all of the olfactory possibilities, I'm on the second, the Gabrielson now, is that on the nose, there's great caramel, nice, gentle depth of wood, but then this sort of dance of fruity notes that you could go anywhere from berry to pineapple. I tend to get a lot of peach or nectarine qualities in the Gabrielson as well. And keep in mind, both of these cognac houses are over a century old, so their practices are pretty tried and true here in terms of what their effort is and what they're specifically trying to achieve. And for all the time that we say, oh, well, VS, is that something I'm going to partake in or suggest to a customer? To me, these are both great examples. They're not the same. They really have great, interesting, different attributes. But for all the times we may consider that, from very honestly an American sensibility, that it's a pretty interesting and almost easy pairing in and of itself that could be a wonderful revelation as a great entry point for this type of pairing together.
I see you all in the comments saying how much you're loving this pairing. And I want to say that one of the things that also makes this pairing work is that Cognac, unlike many cheeses in its category, which is like a bloomy rind or triple creme, is pretty salty. And there's something about the way that the saltiness plays with the toastiness of the Cognac that I think really works. Cognac is surprising because it is mild. It is a sort of universal archetype of beloved cheese, but it's also not, it's not generic. It definitely has its own sort of point of view. And I think that really helps with Cognac and with spirits in general, because they can overpower some cheeses.
And would you mind giving a comment? I assume, because I've done it already, the idea is to eat the rind also. So I'm now comparing the pairing with a little bit of the rind as well.
Yeah. So first of all, when you cut a cheese, you cut it like a pie or a cake, right? You should always, sorry, where's my camera? You should always cut it so that each piece of the cheese that you take gives you a uniform experience of both the paste and the rind. So please do that. And I think you just get, first of all, they're meant to, a cheese is meant to be eaten. A cheese like this is meant to be eaten with its rind at all times. Digging out the paste is not the look, not the flex you were hoping for. And so you get a real vegetal quality from that rind, which I think is like a nice counterbalance to the sort of sweet, salty, dense creaminess that's happening.
I think it goes well. So I intentionally now, I emptied the glass and just so I could see what aromatic notes are left.
There you go.
And a lot more spice comes through to me on the nose, having emptied the glass. That clove quality that, to be honest, for me, I most of all associate more with cinnamon bark than with cloves specifically, if you have that, portent differential. But I love it now, tasting it with the rind, in fact, because I think that earthiness plays nicely, whether it's cinnamon bark, it's like a little bit of cardamom quality also. And so if you're thinking of cocktails as well, these are price points for cognac that you can really make great cognacs, and again, I think, at least from my experience in the bar that we certainly have gone to a simpler fashion from ideation and concept and cocktails. We're making Manhattan variations. We just did a variation, very honestly, with rye whiskey and VSOP cognac, but we added a little bit of Amaro at the end to bump up the herbal quality as well. So I think, there's some fun 3-4 ingredient cocktail ideas with both of these cognacs as well.
And I see a question coming through about what fruit to add to this pairing. And I would really let the cognac lead the way on that. We are really picking up today like stone fruit and spices. So I would be thinking something, like a spiced peach jam, or, some kind of fruit butter that maybe pulls a couple of those spices, because again, the salt in cognac is really doing a solid here. It's really pulling out, I think, the spiced tones of the cognac. Just like when you're cooking and you add salt, it sort of pulls everything out. And I feel like Cognac's really, really doing that. But this cheese is such a good example of a mild, very approachable cheese that is complex. Because a lot of these mild, approachable cheeses that people think of, they often don't have that much going on. But I think Cognac is a really good example of how something that's really approachable can really be a heavy lifter.
Yeah. And well, let's go on to the next slide, and we'll give everyone a chance to prep your cognac, prep your cheese. I'll give one other thought while you just take a half minute to do that on your own. We'll get prepped as well. For me, it's not only dried fruits where we think of dried apricots and dried cranberries, some things that a lot of us have at our disposal at our bars and our restaurants are dehydrators. And I found, not just as garnishes, to put lots of different fruits, whether it's stone fruits like Tia recommends, but other things like pineapple in the dehydrator, not only great from a tasting and comparative tasting standpoint, but for me, it's also been great from a training standpoint. And a lot of us have had, a real heavy duty staff turnover, or we're new to a staff. And it's almost, I'm not going to say, going back to square one, but there's some of the pleasures, I think, that we've been able to revert to, both with our bar at the distillery and other accounts that we've had to work with, to do trainings, almost reverting to the styles and tempos that we did a decade ago of doing tastings for their own sake and not taking for granted that we might have some familiarity with these flavors themselves. So I love the idea of dehydrating also because it adds a whole nother texture that tends to sit on your palate. It sits on your tongue as it evaporates or as you destroy it in your mouth. It sits on your upper palate. And as you can mix it with cognac or mix it with cheese, it's a real great opportunity for some of these flavors to mix together while you're tasting them at the same time. Okay, I hope you're all ready. We'll go on to our next pairing of Courvoisier VSOP and one of my all-time favorite cheeses. Truly, I said to Tia earlier, I go through about a wheel of these with my family, and my kids don't eat cheese. So it's really just me and my wife. We go through a wheel of this a month. They don't eat cheese yet, I should say. I hope, I pray. But go ahead and we'll take the nose, short, quick sniffs. Okay, short, quick sniffs again. And we'll just put it to the side. And, this to me, is one of the classics that you'll surely be most familiar with in Courvoisier. And go ahead and take a taste of that as well. To me, the immediate point of difference is the toasted notes. This has got more of a toasted quality to it. And it may seem obvious. It may seem obvious because it spent a little bit more time in the barrel. But that being said, I think it's something that we want to keep in mind, particularly as we get to this intentional pairing and the powerfulness of this cheese. So keep in mind, this is not just a blend of several cru, but where these cru are from. And in particular, Courvoisier is coming from a range of cru, and that's Fimbois and Grand and Petit Champagne. And if you need to revert to a map, you can look it up online. But to me, again, starting to talk about how there are similarities and differences that oftentimes, and these are characteristics I've gotten from other VSOP as well, I'll go back to peach, but it's not just, I can't tell you what variety of peach, but in terms of the range of its ripeness, that this is almost like the softer, overripe peach in aroma to me, with a bit more of a nutty note on the nose, but also, and for those of you that know me, who know that I love tea also, that there's a distinctive herbal quality to the Courvoisier VSOP, from my opinion, and that's like jasmine pearl tea, which typically is that taut brown green tea, but with the fragrance of jasmine. Those are three things I pull out immediately when I tasted this morning, and I still do now. But go ahead and taste again. And we'll have some fun with a little parliamentary funk on the Willoughby from Vermont. If I'll let you take it away, Tia.
Thanks. There's something about the smell of this cheese too. It's like smelling a piece of honeycomb. There's something so sweet. Okay, I'm sorry to speak with my mouth full.
That's okay.
We're like really playing with texture here. I want everyone to think about and play around more with texture, to really think about texture and cheese and weight.
I'd also add, there's such an earthiness to this cheese. And notice when you take the cognac again, how it almost, to me, dampens the alcohol and brings right to the fore the wood quality, the spice quality, and then as they meld together, it reverts back to some of the fruit quality. It's really fascinating, just from a scientific standpoint, how the act of tasting together changes the whole characteristic of the cognac.
Listen, butterfat is a hell of a palate. It's such a canvas. It can carry so much. Again, too, think about how salt is playing here. I wouldn't describe Willoughby as a salty cheese at all, but there is the balance of the salt in this cheese is really nice, and I think it's really important with Cognac. It just, I don't know, it makes it formidable. Like it allows it to not be overpowered by something as sort of complex as Cognac. You say, I see someone saying it has the best texture. Yeah, I was saying about this cheese that you can buy this cheese in lots of places, and I'm sure it's always beautiful when it leaves the cellars at Jasper Hill. But a lot can go wrong with a wash rind cheese as it's waiting for you to buy it. And this is a cheese that definitely, when you buy it from a cheesemonger who really knows how to take care of it, really, really benefits. So this rind is just gorgeous. It's moist and, but not wet. It's like, it's beautiful. It's really, really beautifully done.
What's fun for me, and this is really a flavor thing, whether you have it in your teeth, on your tongue, or your upper palate, is that in the rind itself, it almost seems like there's gentle remnants of a little bit of grittiness is the best way I can describe it. It's almost like these little texture molecules.
Mhm.
And then again, going back, I'm going to take the aroma. Again, it's drastically, well, significantly different. Where the peach falls, or where the toast notes fall, or to me, the almond quality is now more pronounced now that I've had the cheese than when I tasted it on its own. To me, it's fun. I'm like sort of scribbling down here because it's just fun. Do you trust your palate?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not just the flavor of nuttiness, but it's also like the way nuts feel in your mouth. I feel like this pairing really
That's a great point.
gets that.
This is so much fun, this particular pairing. And again, again, I'm just going to layer it on with some truth and honesty. It was, oh, VSOP. We think of that as, oh, that's mainstream, or that's everyday. And I think the fun here is this is almost like a little bit of jazz improvisation, in that one thing works this way on its own, one thing works another way on its own, and it's something completely different together. And it's further and further evolving as you take the time to taste it, hopefully 2 or 3 times. And the best part of this is you all have plenty of cheese and plenty of cognac. And what I would highly suggest is not just going through it today with Tia and with me, but do it again at home. Do it first thing in the morning tomorrow, or late at night when you feel like you're in a brain fog from the day, and see how those tastes change. Because this is the whole benefit. Stupidly, I used to take notes like this on Post-it notes of all the missed opportunities. But if you keep a little tasting notebook, this is the perfect opportunity. And again, in a cursory way, we're going to cover as many things as possible, but you can dig into details on these cognacs and these cheeses based on production, based on seasonality as well, and really have a great point of discovery. Let's go to the next slide.
I see a good question here from Connor. He says, do funky cheeses have a typical or predictable impact on what you could say is a toasted tropical fruit cognac like Courvoisier? I would say that I don't know if it's always predictable, the impact, but I do think that wash rind cheeses can really have tropical fruit notes. And that, so when you're pairing them with cognacs that also have strong notes of tropical fruit, you're gonna see what happens. The thing about cheese that I love is that the same cheese, so the cheese, a cheese made by the cheesemaker that carries the same name is going to be different throughout the year. It's going to be different depending on how it was handled. So I never like to make predictions about exactly how a pairing's going to go. But yes, I do think that wash rind cheeses can really play with the tropical fruit notes in different cognacs.
Let's go on to the next slide for pleasure and the sake of time. This is a major treat here. I hope that most of us have tasted before. The 10 generations from Cognac Ferrand, and have probably gotten a chance in our lifespan and work span to meet Alexander Gabriel, or perhaps someone who works with him locally where you are. The few starting points of differentiation. So the name itself, again, you may be familiar, comes, you can read about it, of course, comes from 10 generations of the Ferrand family, which started with Elie Ferrand, who made cognac. And the idea, as from my understanding, from Maison Ferrand, was to say, could we, in celebration of these 10 generations, an amazing feat in of itself, make a style of cognac that would not only pay homage to, but revert to styles that would have been more familiar in the 19th century, in the 1800s themselves. And so one, okay, none of us were around then, but it's something to consider, that at the very least in a comparative set that we can take into consideration. And the other, which I think are really two things that are vital. One, as we talked about with each, is the appellation, the cru, and these are Premier Cru grapes from Grand Champagne only. Again, all Uni Blanc, but from Grand Champagne, but bottled at 46% ABV, not the more familiar, the more typical 40% ABV. And I know I won't speak for all of us as bartenders, but we often have a feeling of mixing with higher proof spirits and what attributes they may have, whether on their own or in a cocktail. But keep that in mind from a flavor standpoint, one, where these grapes are coming from, and two, the bottling proof, once it has been aged, is not insignificant. So, same relation here to these other cognacs, but to me, on the nose, a much gentler caramel. So sometimes, you have grades of caramel. If you put sugar in the dry pan and turn it on low heat, it starts in different colors, maybe gentle golden to amber, and ultimately to burnt. None of these are burnt caramel, but this is almost a fruitier caramel, a coconut or raisinier caramel that is, by comparison, a tremendous floral bomb to me. Rose. Whenever I smell this, having worked with it with different cocktails that I'm sure you're familiar as well, orange flower water comes to the fore. So if I was taking a fruit context, whether it's orange or apricot and peach, but something like dehydrated oranges immediately to me is something a lot of fun with this cognac. So we'll talk about the cheese. Go ahead, T, and then we'll come back and talk about the pairing.
Sure. So first of all, I really love this cognac. And I chose an Alpine cheese because Alpine cheeses really embody the floral for me. I remember I'm sorry, my cat is going crazy over this cheese board. The first time I went to an Alpine region, I was in Bavaria, and I was learning all about Alpine cheeses and what makes them great and how they're made and everything. And my guide said, you can never replicate an Alpine cheese because you can never plant the flowers that we have in each region. So I chose this because of one, the nuttiness, but also that to me, Alpine cheeses really represent the very inefficient transfer of energy of the sun that cheese is, which is the sun shines, the grass grows, the flowers bloom, the cows eat it, they make the milk, then a cheesemaker takes the milk and makes the cheese, and then somehow you've captured the energy of the sun and like the power of the pasture in a cheese. And I think this really does it. This is an American Alpine cheese. I love this cognac, and I love this pairing so much that I knocked my computer over.
Well,
And
for
this
me,
to me is like, if Cognac and the first two are sort of 101 pairing, this to me is like a very sophisticated pairing. This is something that you give someone that you really love.
I think this also speaks to,
Yes, cheese terroir, of course.
it speaks one to your creativity, Tia, I think very specifically, but also to Ferran's creativity in that there is this allowance, even though there's this biblical sized rule book on how cognac can be made and when it can be made and how it can be aged, and it has to fall into certain characteristics, that there is still this freedom for originality. And, you know, again, tasting this again after this cheese, it's like the nuttiness comes out. There's still orange flower water to me. But again, some of these hallmarks of nutmeg, something that's drastically different to me is a little bit of gentle ginger.
Mm.
I know there was a comment earlier in the chat about, is it okay to add water? For me, it is. I would add a little bit of water to anything. It should be pleasant to you. If you're adding a lot of water, it might just mean you don't like what you're drinking, but a little bit of water, absolutely. And obviously tamps down on the proof. It tamps down on the alcohol, and that just might make the flavor more accessible to your palate. So it's absolutely fine. I would always taste it perhaps at bottle proof, excuse me, at bottle proof. And then if you feel the need, add water. Another interesting note on the cognac is what it's aged in. This starts in traditional French oak, but it's finished in Sauterne barrels. So I believe, I'm going to assume all of us have had Sauterne wine, and you get some of that, you know, it's almost like it's influential just by saying it. Do I smell that? Do I smell those muscat grapes? Is it more tropical in flavor? All of a sudden, I smell mango. I didn't smell that before, but as soon as I said Sauterne, some of those more tropical notes tend to influence what I'm tasting. And I think those are just, I could say wonderful. That's a throwaway. Most of all, it's fun with this cheese because it's pineapple-y and mango-y and the gentle caramel and a little ginger. And then maybe on the finish, a little bit more of herbal quality comes through as well. You can tell we can get excited on these. We're going to get to the last slide here.
Someone just asked though if they should eat the rind.
Oh, go ahead.
And the answer is that the only rind you can eat is a wax rind. So it's definitely edible. And that's just a matter of preference in this case. With this type of cheese, I don't think the cheesemaker is necessarily expecting you to eat the rind. And for me personally today, I fed it to my cat so that he would leave me alone.
Too funny. So we're going to go on to the last slide. You may need just a moment to prepare. This is another wonderful and very special cognac, a treat to be able to share with everyone and to taste together. This is Maxime Trigeau. And this is, again, from my understanding, although it's a little bit coy, I believe it's all Uni Blanc. There may be a little bit of other grapes in there, but this is, again, essentially Uni Blanc creation. We're going back to the more typical 40% ABV. And again, for an XO, we're talking about minimum aging of 10 years. So 10 plus years in the barrel. This is something I would say I wouldn't mix with. It's best neat. It's okay to add water. I think it's absolutely fine because it might bring out a different bouquet. And again, I'm going to take 3 short, quick sniffs. And to me, the first thing is, yes, a little bit of caramel, yes, a little bit of wood, but mainly spice. And I think that's obviously a sign of time in the barrel. And it's this spice that sort of evolves into a little bit more of a floral context. Again, not the same type of sort of much lighter, brighter rose that was in the 10 generations, but something a little bit darker, I believe, in characteristic from a flavor standpoint. And then for me, it's figs and raisins and prunes, and not, oh, the fleshy overripe peach. I'm past that now. It's really these darker fruits, almost like stewed pears rather than a fresh pear, or the crunch of an underripe pear that you might have considered previously in something more tropical. This is darker. This is wandering in the forest. And it's really remarkable, what a point of difference it is. I'm going to go ahead and taste it.
When I was working on this pairing, I was sort of thinking of this cognac almost like a port, or, which brought me to the blue cheese. It's a very traditional pairing, port and blue cheese, and this felt like a version of that in its own way because of the dark fruit, the stewed fruit, for sure, stewed fruit. I think about like, stewed prunes, which I love actually.
And what's so great, I want you to talk about Bailey Hazen specifically, if you would, but that again, going back to a cheese that's so rich, but also so pliable that you can really retain this and then go back and have all the elements of this rich blue cheese and taste the cognac again and see what a difference it makes in the flavor profile.
Yeah, and today too, I don't know why I have this bee in my bonnet about salt. But the salt, I guess maybe when I was making these pairings, I wasn't conscious, but now that I've had a couple of distance from it, it's really apparent to me how important like the salt levels are to the way the pairings interact. So Bailey Hazen Blue is at this point an American classic. This is, again, a really incredible example of Bailey Hazen Blue. I think sometimes when we get it from shops that maybe it's a little past its prime, it's wetter. This is really, to me, like the perfect density for cognac. There's a real nuttiness to this cheese. I like that this is a less nutty cognac, and so the cheese kind of brings that element a little bit. There's something so seaweedy about this cheese that I love
Very much.
too, that I think plays really well with the cognac.
I agree. And again, I love the lineup of how these cognacs have flowed also, because there's such a drastic change. And sometimes it's not to say, I won't go so far and step on any toes and say the pairings are interchangeable, but I would also suggest when you're doing this at home, take your own riff, and almost an homage to Gary Regan, who taught me the greatest lesson of my life, which was as a bartender, he would say, Alan, don't trust the recipes. And he didn't mean that the recipes were bad or that there was a fallibility to the recipes. It was simply to say, make sure it tastes good to you. And if you interchange some of these pairings when you go back and taste tonight or tomorrow, you'll notice some unique differences, both by texture and the flavor profile. Again, encouraging, I hope, to just jot down a few, call them notes, call them just whatever pops into your mind about how these tastings sit on your palate.
Yeah, you're not stepping on toes. I would encourage everyone to try all of these cognacs with all of these cheeses, because I do think you're going to find other pairings here besides the ones that we laid out today. Again, bringing back to sort of my initial point, which is that weight and density are really important when pairing any spirits with cheese, but especially spirits like cognac, which have so much going on. If you're not thinking about the density and the weight of the cheese, you're sort of at a disadvantage from the beginning. But when you're considering that for the pairing, all of these cheeses are going to have something interesting to say with each of these cognacs.
It's fun. Thank God it's fun. Truly.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing Emily Robinson's comment about a sort of apricot, pistachio, and brandy crisp with the blue and the Maxime, and I'm like, yes, 1000%.
Well, we have just a moment or two. I know an hour goes by very fast, and Boy, it's fun to escape, the same realities we've all been living in here via these pandemic times. So I want to say, most of all, thank you to those who put their name and where they're coming from in the chat. It's great to see you. Thank you, most of all. And most of all, I wish you and your colleagues and your families good health. And let's get to the end of this. We keep saying it again and again, but hopefully we'll all see each other in person soon and can share these experiences in person soon. But short of that, it's so much fun to just have this, not only as an educational standpoint, but as a wonderful escape to further what we think about. And I hope there was something new for everyone today, perhaps individually, something new to think about, something new to consider, whether by cognac or pairing cognac, in this case specifically with cheese. And Tia, thank you so much. You're really the backbone of creating these pairings, and a magnificent job. So
I
kudos
love
and
working
thanks.
with you, Alan, and I don't know why I'm feeling teary on this goodbye. It's been quite a year.
It has been. I do want to let everyone know that you'll all be getting a short questionnaire by email. So as a registrant, you will get a follow-up, and the questionnaire is also vital to us for your feedback, critical feedback about the presentation, and particularly for the benefit of our host, who also deserves great thanks for supporting the work that we're able to present today, and that's the BNIC. As much as I encourage everyone to post on social media about today's experience, if you don't already, it's really worthwhile to follow the BNIC on social media too. Lots of great information. And as Americans in particular, to get the perspective of cognac from the people who live and breathe it in France itself. It's not always the same. And to me, that's the real pleasure of being in the industry that we're in, that we have our own perspectives and points of view, and that we can come together and share them in an occasion like this. So santé, and thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all. This was so much fun. And thank you for saying so many nice things in the comments. We really enjoy it. And I want to say that not only do I love working with Cognac, but I also love working with the team at 2N. They're just, it's been a long time that we've been working together, and I really enjoy it. So thank you.